Good evening. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Maria Garcia. As we've been telling you, we've been keeping you updated on a big push here in El Paso for a municipal ID program. It's become significantly controversial in other cities. As we reported, the Border Network for Human Rights in January turned in a petition to the city with more than 10,000 signatures requesting the city issue municipal IDs. Supporters say municipal IDs can help people who have a hard time obtaining identifiable documents, like the homeless and undocumented immigrants. And this week, the city released a study that looks at the three major areas of concern here: the feasibility, the risks, and the possible cost per ID. The city determined if a municipal ID program was offered here, it would require a $50 fee per card to avoid using taxpayer dollars. And joining us tonight, Robert Heyman with Border Network for Human Rights and Adolpho, chair of the local Republican Party. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC-7 Extra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by phone at 496-1775. On Twitter, you can tweet me at MariaGABC7. Before our discussion, though, let's look at more details from the study. Here's a report filed by our Darren Hunt.
I think that figure is a little bit high.
Robert Heyman is policy coordinator for the Border Network of Human Rights, which estimates there are 40 to 60,000 people in El Paso without ID. The group showed up at a council meeting earlier this year with 10,000 signatures asking the city to create a municipal ID program.
There is a very fundamental need that as a community we need to figure out how we can meet.
The white paper study finds a municipal ID would not increase access to most services identified by its proponents. It also states it could risk El Paso being identified as a sanctuary city, making it vulnerable to legislative sanctions. And finally, the cost is estimated at $50 each in order to avoid dipping into the general fund.
There's been some discussion of figuring out how to amortize the upfront cost over a 3 or 5 year period to bring down sort of that upfront hurdle.
The real crux of the white paper, I think, is hit on the first issue of acceptance and feasibility. The first sentence is, the municipal ID would not increase access to most services. There's no absolute reason for it.
Bob Pena is elections administrator for the El Paso County Republican Party, and he said it's not worth the risk of losing funding if El Paso is identified as a sanctuary city.
These are major hurdles that would immediately notify our city council that this is not a good idea.
All right, and joining us now is Robert Heyman with the Border Network for Human Rights and Adolpho, chair of the local Republican Party. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So, Robert, I want to start with you. The study really doesn't do well for the cause that the Border Network for Human Rights has been championing over the last year. It really contradicts the crux of your argument by saying municipal IDs in El Paso would not really increase access to essential services.
Well, I have a couple of things to say on that. I mean, first of all, it's notable that the page-and-a-half introduction to the study talks about risks, it talks about an alleged lack of feasibility, it talks about costs, but it doesn't talk about any benefits. This is something that has been used in other cities to allow people to feel comfortable interacting with police, so that they actually call police to report emergencies. It's been used to help people get access to bank accounts so that they don't have to rely on check cashers and payday lenders. It helps people be able to go pick up a sick child from school. And none of that's mentioned in that executive summary, in that forward to the white paper. And I think that tells us something about how the white paper was put together. I think this is really an unbalanced piece of work that's coming out of the city. And I mean, to get to that issue of feasibility, you know, what we've been hearing is we've had discussions, members of our coalition, a very broad coalition that's been pushing for this, as we've had discussions with people of the city. You know, one of the things that they did is that they sent a letter to various institutions, officials, asking them a series of fairly technical legal questions about whether they would accept these a municipally issued identification card. And they didn't do much in the way of follow-up. They didn't give it much time for people to get those turned around, and then they interpreted a lack of response as people not being willing to accept them.
Okay.
So I mean, for one example, they sent one of these letters to Sheriff Wiles. Sheriff Wiles has been on the record publicly for months as supporting an ID, saying that the sheriff's office would accept these ID when they encounter people.
So why not go to the county then and ask them to pay for it, or ask them to do it?
Well, we are working with county. As I said, we're working at this point with a very broad coalition, and we're working with Commissioner Stout.
So why not
and
turn
with
in the petition that you turned into City Council to the county?
Well, there's one key limitation on the county's ability to do this. The county has the authority under the Texas Constitution to issue an ID. They don't have authority under the Texas Constitution to create a new fee.
Okay.
And so a municipality under home rule
Right.
has that ability. So what we're looking to do is bring the county, bring the city of El Paso, bring all of the outlying municipalities, bring all of these institutions to the table, and rather than come up with reasons why this can't move forward, figure out what it would take to have a program that would work for El Pasoans.
Okay. Robert, I want to talk about his first point, and that's sort of the foundation here of the justification for this municipal ID, and that's that it would create safer communities because you would have people who could identify themselves with authorities now. Wouldn't we be safer if, regardless of immigration status, we knew exactly who was here based on a municipal ID?
Yeah, I do want to respond to that. I guess I want to back up a little bit, because what I heard to begin with, that we have 40 to 60,000 people without IDs here in El Paso. We have done some research trying to find out where that number comes from, and we can't find anything that supports that number. There's no studies that come back and tell us that this is what, by city, that undocumented individuals are, what the numbers are. So first of all, I don't know where that comes from. Second of all, El Paso is the safest city over 500,000 in the United States. So if we've got people that don't have identifications today, they're either illegal, because the individuals that are homeless, they're entitled to identification. If they are ex-military, it's easy for them to get an identification. If people want to go to the Department of Public Safety, they can get a voter ID card for free from that source. So it's not like there's not available sources already. And when it comes to safety, we are safe already. So I can't understand, and I don't understand, what the additional benefit is, other than maybe people are going to make money off of it, because they're talking about, I heard numbers of $800,000 to $1 million, and for the initial cost. That's a taxpayer cost. I've also heard that there's another $250,000, $300,000 a year for maintenance. That's a taxpayer cost. I've also heard numbers about the number of people that might sign up, and they're talking about maybe 10,000, and I think that came from yourself in a discussion you had with somebody else. So if you're talking about 10,000, that's $100 a person just for the front end costs, and then the annual maintenance cost. And there's some studies that have been done on how many of these IDs get renewed, and the number is very, very low.
Okay.
So there's a lot of issues here that are completely unanswered, and the research, I'm not sure where it came from, because 40 to 60, I don't know where that number came from.
Let's start with that. Break it down for us. The 40 to 60,000 people estimated in El Paso that the Border Network for Human Rights projects needs this ID.
Right.
How do you get those numbers?
I actually think that's on the low end. There are a couple of studies estimating just the undocumented population in El Paso County. The Migration Policy Institute a couple of years ago put it around 50,000. The Center for Migration Studies, in reports of data that was released earlier this year, put it between 50 and 60,000 countywide. On top of that, you have about 1,500 people who are in homeless shelters on any given night, about 4,000 people who are homeless over the course of the year. You have individuals who are transgendered and don't feel like they're adequately identified with
Let's start
existing
with the-
identification.
Let's start with the undocumented immigrant population.
Okay.
The Mexican consulate here, the consul, I did an interview with him a few months ago. He says it costs $26 to get the matricula consular, the Mexican ID for Mexican nationals, and it's an official ID here in the U.S. as well. El Paso Police accepts it, and it's fairly accessible to get. I mean, it's
The banks accept it to open bank accounts also.
Banks?
some banks. The consulate says some banks
There's four
accept
large
it.
ones in this community that do, because we called them and asked them.
But they only accept it as a secondary form of identification. You can't only go in with a matricula consular and open up a bank account.
But the safety
acceptance of
issue, but the foundation here, as you say, the big issue here is a safety issue, that these residents,
not the
El Paso
population.
Police takes the
population that would
matricula.
El Paso Police might take the matricula as long as the state legislature lets them take the matricula. There's been a lot of pushback on acceptance of the matricula, and we're seeing that consistently rolled back. I mean, one of the things that you're seeing around birth certificates in Texas is that the state is cracking down on acceptance of the matricula consular as in allowing people to get birth certificates for U.S. citizen children. So I don't think we can rely on the matricula as an option going forward, on top of which there are significant populations that aren't Mexican nationals that can't get a matricula consular to begin with.
Okay, what about those other populations he mentioned?
Let me back. I want to talk about the 50 to 60,000 because that's the biggest number that we're talking about here. And I go back to, if those are the ones that's the biggest group that we're trying to help, those people are in this country illegally. And believe me, I support legal immigration. As a matter of fact, I go to the naturalization services and give out, after it's over, constitutions, and we do that with regularity. So if those are the people that we're trying to help, those people have broken the United States federal laws. And we've got individuals trying to help them to continue break federal laws. We are teaching our population, particularly the children, the wrong message, that you choose which laws you want to support and you choose which laws you want to ignore. That's anarchy if we start doing that.
But
And
Adolpho,
that's wrong.
by
That's
all
wrong.
accounts and purposes, across the political spectrum, there's consensus that the immigration system is broken.
I agree.
And it's a complex system. And you know, whether you agree with it or not, 11 million people here are here. In the United States, they're here. They're living their lives. And so, you know, there's an argument about ensuring that while they're here, we know who they are, we can identify them, and we make it more efficient for them to communicate with police.
And I agree with you. I think our immigration system is broken, and I think we have to do something about it. But in order to get there, and this is a completely different discussion, but you brought it up, I'm going to touch on it, because I think we need to do something about it. I think these people broke the law. Not the kids that their parents brought. Who broke the law? The parents that came over, they bring their children. I think the children clearly need to be worked with. They should be allowed to complete their education. They should have a path to citizenship. The people that broke the law, there should be a penalty. Anybody, if I break the law, I get penalized.
But for example, one of the uses that the matricula consular cannot be used for, according to the Mexican consulate, is for undocumented immigrants to get the birth certificate of their U.S. citizen children. And so there's a lot of complexities that basically inhibit these undocumented immigrants at times to get basic documentation that proves that their children who were born here in the United States are in fact their children.
Those children were given birth certificates when they were born. And one of the issues,
You're
one of
not
the
given
issues
a
that
birth
there's a
certificate when you're
concern, one of the
born.
concern that's occurring is that those
But
documents
you
are
really,
being
you really
used.
aren't. You don't get a birth certificate. You get.
I got one.
You don't get a birth certificate.
I
when
got
you're-
one.
I don't know if the system has changed, but I had a baby last year, and you don't get a certificate.
It's
in the
mailed to
hospital.
you wherever you put your information.
Yeah, it is. It is mailed to you. It is mailed to you at a later date.
Okay.
That's true.
So So you get one when you're born. And if they lost it, and one of the issues that's occurring is people are trying to use these to get a documentation for people that have even died already. So there's got to be control, because we've got people that they're breaking the law and they're trying to break it again. That's what I struggle with.
I mean, I think there's a fairly serious internal contradiction here, that we're asking people to come forward to identify themselves to authorities, to have a document that can be used to identify them, and then that's all for some idea that it's unknowable, and they're out of control. You can't have it both ways. Either we need to be able to identify them and have something like a municipal ID so that we know who people in this community are, or we have a system where we have tens of thousands of people who we don't know who they are.
But look, I know there's a basic, fundamental, philosophical difference here, and the difference is the view on immigration. And I want you to respond to Adolfo's comment that you're essentially enabling people to live here illegally, incentivizing people to come here illegally, because you're facilitating their life here illegally when legally they shouldn't be here.
Well, we're certainly not incentivizing it. If you look at the academic literature on migration, it's cut and dry. The far and away the largest driver of migration is economics. And as long as the economy of the United States is strong, something I think both myself and Mr. Tejas would want, then people are going to come here. And it's a reflection of a broken system that they come here without authorization.
Okay, all right, well, we have to take a commercial break. I know both of you guys want to make another point. I promise we'll get to that right after this commercial break.
If I can just finish by saying one thing, these cards are not going to change anyone's immigration status. They don't provide any legalization. They don't provide any path toward anything like legalization. They would not be accepted as proof of citizenship or lawful presence by the Border Patrol or by ICE. All they are is a basic way for people to be able to identify themselves while they're here in this community.
Mm-hmm. But it makes it easier for them to navigate their life here in the U.S. And there's an argument that it shouldn't be easy to live here
New Mexico started
illegally.
with the same thing. They give driver's license, and look at the pickle they're in now, when the federal government is not going to allow New Mexico driver's license to be used to access federal facilities, and they're not going to allow them to even use to get on planes. Look at the impact it's having on the citizens of that state if that comes through, because they've already started saying that's what they're going to do.
But it's interesting that the New Mexico
citizens.
Senate in the last legislative session almost unanimously passed a bipartisan compromise to keep in place a driver's license system that would still allow undocumented residents of New Mexico access to driver's licenses.
Okay. I really do have to take this commercial break now. We'll be right back. We're going to get to your comments and your questions now via email at ABC-7 at KVIA.com. Also, my producer telling me that we're having some trouble with our phone lines. We're going to try to troubleshoot that. But for now, please email us instead of calling us, ABC-7 at KVIA.com, and tweet me at MariaGABC7. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Maria Garcia. We're talking about municipal IDs. Good discussion here with Adolpho Tejas, chair of the Republican Party, and Robert Heyman with the Border Network for Human Rights. Adolpho, when the Border Network for Human Rights turned in this petition to City Council, you had 10,000 people saying, look, we're willing to pay for this. We're not asking for a free service. If it's going to cost us $50, $100 to get this ID, we'll pay for it. So if they're willing to incur the cost of this program, what is the issue at hand?
Well, let's look at the cost. First of all, there's going to have to be a large upfront cost. The taxpayers are paying for that. Then there's going to have to be, as was stated earlier, there's going to be an amortization of that cost over several years. So now the taxpayers are carrying that. Then there's an annual cost related to maintaining that. If you have a big hit in the front, you're going to have smaller hits in the back of people signing up, and you've got to maintain the infrastructure. The taxpayers are paying that. And then if you're going to give them rights to the community, people talk about the libraries, and I'd like them to have rights, and I think they can get that right now just with their matricula, if that's what the city chooses to give them. They don't need a separate ID for that. But those are taxpayer costs, the libraries again. And if you go down the line, it is not, if they pay 50, which again, we talked about earlier, that maybe we're going to have 10,000 people sign up, and the first front-end cost is $800,000 to $1 million. That's $80 to $100. How are we recapturing that? The math doesn't work in my mind that they're paying for it, because they're not paying for it.
I want to mention, you mentioned taxpayers, and you all were having this discussion during the commercial break, and every time, there's a discussion about undocumented immigrants, people refer to them as if they're not taxpayers. But as Robert was saying, they pay sales tax. If they rent homes, they pay property taxes through their rent. So they do contribute to the local economy via taxes.
Okay, let's go back to a basic premise. They came here, a large majority of them, as illegal immigrants. Illegal means they broke the law. So now they're making money somewhere, and they're probably using an identification or a social security number. If their employer is legitimate, they're using somebody else's ID number, or they made one up, or they're using a social security number that they got from someplace. And if they're not using that, then they're getting money under the table, and they're not paying taxes as it relates to employment. So they are paying rent. If the landlord chooses to rent to them, I mean, they're a taxpayer from that perspective, but they're also, their kids are going to our school systems. That's a taxpayer cost. Do you think that the rent that they're paying, the tax portion of that, covers the cost of their education or any other services they might be, including our safety? I mean, we pay our city police, our county sheriff. We've got a host of law enforcement that have done a great job in this community. And when you look at the taxes they pay, their property taxes compared to what a normal citizen pay, or their taxes in general, are going to be significantly less.
When you look at the most recent study, which admittedly is getting a few years old by this point, but by then State Comptroller Carol Keaton-Strayhorn back in the mid-2000s, immigrants were documented and undocumented, were a net boon to the Texas economy. They were a net positive contributor to taxes at the state level. They were a net positive contributor to taxes at the federal level, and in ways that more than makes up for the shortfalls at local government. These are people who are taxpayers. They do pay sales taxes and property taxes, which are the taxes that fund our city government, and there's no reason why they should be excluded from the benefits of that government as long as they're helping to pay to sustain it.
Okay, we have an email from Adrian. Let's be honest, the Border Network for Human Rights is the one pushing to have this done. It's no secret that they support illegal immigration. Since immigration is a federal issue, the city should not get involved in the identification cards issue. Local law enforcement doesn't enforce immigration because, again, it is a federal issue. So how is this issue any different? The city, in essence, would be condoning and rewarding illegal behavior. Plus, who would foot the bill if the measure is passed? The law-abiding, tax-paying constituents of the city of El Paso. Do you want to respond to Adrian?
I want to begin by saying the Border Network for Human Rights supports legal immigration. We don't encourage undocumented immigration. We don't encourage unauthorized migration. But what we do is we want a legal system that's robust and capable of handling the realities of migration to the United States. And
I think that's something you can agree with them on.
That is something that we agree with.
Like I said earlier, I go to the Naturalization Services, and I've never seen anybody from his organization there welcoming the new citizens that have done it right. And if you ask them how they feel about illegals, these people that did it right say, you know, it took me 7, 8, 10, 14 years to do this. And we have other people that come in illegally, and they start getting the benefits of this country, and they didn't go through the process that I went through. And there's some, it's amazing to me how many people are resent the illegal side of this because they did it the right way.
But we can't let that resentment dictate policy, dictate what's in ways that aren't going to serve what's best for this community. The other thing I was going to say is the Board Network for Human Rights supports legal immigration, but we also realize that we have to deal with the realities of the people who are here. These are members of our community. These are people working and living in our community. These are our neighbors. Often they're our friends and our family members. And we can't just uproot them. So we need to figure out ways that we can deal with them that advance the entire community's well-being. Community ID falls into
Our biggest risk as a community is to be identified as a sanctuary city. And I think our law enforcement have done a great job of identifying when people get arrested if they are a potential illegal and they report it to the feds. So I think we're okay so far. But that could change.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott cracking down on so-called sanctuary cities. $250 million worth of criminal justice grants will be off limits, he says, to counties and cities who don't fully cooperate with federal immigration law. And the city study that was just released this week says this is what El Paso can risk if it issues municipal IDs, being identified in this category that could lose funding.
That's a big if. I mean, we're talking about Abbott's proposal, which at this point is still unclear. There's no set definition for sanctuary city.
He has support in the Texas legislature. I mean,
well, he has support now. The legislature isn't going to be convening for another 13 months, and the bills aren't actually going to be passing for probably another 18 months.
Okay, we have to take a commercial break. When we come back, we have a lot of emails and tweets to get to. So you're watching ABC-7 Extra. Remember, you can email us at ABC-7Extra@KVIA.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We're talking about municipal IDs tonight. Let's get to some of your tweets.
If I can finish my comment from before. You know, we can't let things that may or may not happen 18 months from now in the legislative session dictate the steps that we can take with the tools that we have available presently to act in the best interest of our community. We have that moral imperative to make sure that we're serving the needs of this community with the tools we have at hand. If the legislature decides to act in a way that I think would genuinely be imprudent around some of this sanctuary city nonsense, then we'll have to reevaluate it. But in the meantime, I think we need to look at this seriously as a way of advancing the well-being of all El Paso.
We also have a moral imperative to support the laws of this city, this county, this state, and this country. And you are promoting violation of those, and you're putting the taxpayers in this community at risk, because this sanctuary city issue is not just a state issue, it's a national issue, and there's going to be additional pressure that comes about as a result of that. And so we've got to decide, if you don't like a law, try to get the law changed, but don't just ignore it. Don't just ignore it.
So let's talk about this. The sanctuary cities maneuvers that Governor Abbott's talking about, that Lieutenant Governor Patrick has been talking about, have been to uphold policies that federal courts are finding unconstitutional. So how do we uphold the rule of law then?
Give me an example.
The Ninth Circuit has ruled that ICE detainers are unconstitutional, that you cannot hold someone without a criminal charge.
But there's other courts that have said it's okay and should be done.
What are those courts?
I didn't bring those notes, but I should have.
Okay, because federal courts, district courts, circuit courts are consistently finding that these ICE detainers that Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick are arguing for are unconstitutional. So if we want to uphold the rule of law, what is the rule of law? Do we uphold an unconstitutional detention so that we can fit some xenophobic idea of what is or is not a sanctuary city? Or do we uphold a rule of law that actually meets the best interests and the needs of this community as exists now?
I think what I'm hearing is that we have a law that says immigration that's not legal is wrong. And what I just heard you say, which just amazes me, is that even though it's wrong, our law enforcement should not be enforcing that law or not allowing the people that are supposed to enforce it. If I break the law, if I have an accident and I commit a vehicular homicide, they're going to put me in jail.
Yes. process.
Well, are you saying that if somebody breaks the federal law of coming in here illegal, they should be able to walk around free because nobody should do anything about
I'm
it?
saying that if someone
That's what you're saying.
violates federal administrative code on immigration, that's not a criminal charge, and ICE detainers have consistently and increasingly been found unconstitutional. So we have the state asking local police to uphold unconstitutional practices.
Okay.
And that's the rule of law that you're asking us to uphold and to turn away from something that would meet basic community needs.
I have to get to our viewers because they want to be part of the discussion here. Heyman is saying lack of inclusion of benefits to municipal IDs in the white paper calls the document in question considering it's worked in other cities. Also saying Chairman Tejas is misinformed. Getting an ID is very difficult for the homeless. Consider how hard it is or what a hassle it is for just a regular person or when an average person loses an ID. John saying taxpayers should not foot the bill for this. My mom came here from Torreon, Mexico, and she got her resident ID legally. And again, this is municipal ID would have no bearing on your federal immigration status. And also from Heyman now, hearing the local GOP comment on this policy issue is laughable, considering many in the GOP want to repeal birthright citizenship. And then also from Adrian, why should local El Paso tax dollars be used to fix a federal issue and possibly cause a loss in federal funding? And then I also want to read this email here from Heyman. It sounds like an awful lot of trouble to do something that can already be done. Why can someone go to the city and get an ID and not go to DPS like everyone else? The idea for a municipal ID is simply to allow people to break the law. Anyone already breaking the law would have no problem providing false information to obtain this farce of an ID. There would be zero added safety for citizens and benefits for people who break the law. What laws can I break? I'm a citizen and no one is coming up with ways for me to break any laws. So there's some viewers who are mirroring Mr. Tejas' thoughts there.
Well, I have a couple of points on those safety considerations. First of all, when San Francisco instituted their ID card, they instituted a card that was more secure, included engraving, biometric security, fingerprinting that was well above and beyond the California driver's license. It was harder to get fraudulently, harder to forge, and in fact there have been no reported cases of fraud with the San Francisco City ID. Additionally,
Just murder.
That wasn't tied to the municipal identification cards.
It's tied to them being a sanctuary city and allowing people to go there, and illegal immigrants knowing that
And
that's
of
a
course
place
you're
that
talking
they'll
about
be
the murder in
accepted.
San Francisco with the man who had officials had attempted to deport him several times and he had come back.
Right. He came back. And it's telling that he came back even with repeated multi-year sentences to federal prison for illegal reentry. That didn't stop him from coming back. Immigrants are going to be here. They're going to be in these communities. And so the question we have is, do we want to know who these people are? Do we want to have them be able to interact with institutions like law enforcement? Or do we want them to be in the shadows where we don't know who's out there? And so New Haven, Connecticut, they introduced their card explicitly to improve public safety so that immigrants in New Haven would feel comfortable reporting crimes to the police, because in New Haven, they were the victims. They were getting mugged, they were getting
I
murdered.
have to stop you there. They're counting me down. I have 10 seconds left.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Adolpho, for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us here on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this informative, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.